Hello, Boston Trinity Academy juniors. Today we are going to talk about the disasters of the 14th and early 15th centuries and the transition to modern Europe. So the first major disaster is the Black Death, something that made COVID-19 look, well, like the cold. Um, 30 to 60% of the European population died. Um, there were the experience of the Black Death is hard really to imagine from our own perspective. The Black Death itself spread from Asia through the Mongol-controlled kind of Central Asia, Russian steppes, and arrived in Western slash Central Europe through the Mediterranean Sea at the Sicilian port of Messina. And then, as you can see from the chart, eventually spread throughout the entirety of Europe over a period of about half a decade. Um, the Black Death had a profound psychological, economic, religious impact on European society. Um, when I said it's hard to imagine what this would have been like, there were entire towns that were depopulated with 100% fatalities to the Black Death. There were ships that would arrive wrecked on the coast, their entire crews dead. Um, you know, entire families could die overnight from the Black Death. So this created a very macabre environment. People began questioning um, the way society was structured, the way the universe was structured. So real existential anxiety for much of European society during this period of the mid 14th century. Um, it struck people from all levels of society, although aristocrats tended to be a bit safer because they were isolated in some ways from the rest of the population. It really um, uh, could strike anybody at any time, and people didn't know where it came from, whether it was caused by satanic forces, whether this was a punishment from God. So, due to the Black Death, we get political turmoil, economic disruption, religious uncertainty, and social class struggle, as well as psychological fears. And so the acronym we can use to remember this is Persia. And all these factors are going to disrupt European society, which will allow it in some ways to progress. And this is one theme of history that we're going to see throughout the year, is that disruption can actually lead to progress. Just like how in some ways we may be seeing that with COVID-19. The move to remote work, the importance of video chatting and other technologies, companies like Peloton, for instance, right? The disruption caused by COVID-19 is allowing certain ways of doing business to flourish in ways that they maybe could not have if there had not been this pandemic. So, one of the ways that society was disrupted is there was a supply and demand problem. With fewer serfs to work the land, they began to demand higher payment, demand greater rights, and this caused problems for the upper classes of society, the noble caste. So in 1351, in the midst of the Black Death, Edward III of England tried to rein in this problem of supply and demand, which at the time people didn't really understand why things cost the way they did. They didn't have a modern economic theory, but essentially the statute of laborers put caps on how much people could charge for their labor. The law was ineffective. It was hard to enforce, but shows just the kind of futile attempt of the nobility to get some kind of control over this economic situation that they couldn't really comprehend or control. In response to movements like the Statute of Labours from 1351 and high taxes during the Hundred Years' War, which I'll talk about in just a second, a major riot rebellion really broke out in southeastern England in 1381. This is called Wat Tyler's Rebellion, and it's one of the most famous peasant uprisings of the Middle Ages. And in retrospect, it'll become even more important when we get into the 19th and 20th centuries, and people like Karl Marx want to look back on medieval European history and early modern European history to see examples of class struggle between the working class, or the proletariat, and the bourgeoisie, or those who control capital and the means of production. In this case, the bourgeoisie would have been the nobles, the military caste that we think of as the knights in shining armor of medieval Europe. Eventually, the rebellion was crushed. However, peasants in England still gained some important concessions from the nobility, and we would see the plight of English peasants be significantly better than those on continental Europe, at least in Western and Central Europe, and especially Eastern Europe. Similarly to Wat Tyler's revolt, we had the Jacquerie revolts in 1356. Now, they were similar in the sense that they stemmed from the discontent of the peasants, and they were fighting against the nobles. However, the Jacquerie revolts had no leader like Wat Tyler, and they had no specific set of political rallying points. This was really a leaderless mob that's sprung up in different places around northern France in response to the anarchy in northern France due to the Hundred Years' War. Truly horrific acts of violence committed on both sides. Roasting people alive, disgusting tortures, like really something out of a horror movie. And this revolt was also put down by the military caste, the Knights of France. Now on to the Hundred Years' War. The Hundred Years' War is important for several reasons. It began the shaping of national identities of England and France, and brought about the end, or at least ushered in the end of the chivalric age, and created military heroes including Joan of Arc, and eventually unified France and left England on the brink of civil war, that war being the War of the Roses. So you can get a nice little map here that details the back and forth nature of the Hundred Years' War. Two important battles of the Hundred Years' War are the Battle of Crécy. Poitiers was another important battle fought shortly after the Battle of Crécy, and the Battle of Agincourt, which was immortalized by Shakespeare in his play Henry V, and also in the recent Netflix movie featuring Timothée Chalamet, The King. And these battles were important because they demonstrated the superiority of the English longbow over mounted French knights. English knights tended to fight on foot as massed infantry using poleaxes, which is basically a combination of a spear and a battle axe, pretty gnarly weapon. And they were supported by longbowmen, masses of longbowmen who would use these very high power longbows to take out the horses from underneath French armored knights, or aim for the chinks in knights' armor. And these were massacres, the battles of Crécy and Agincourt, very lopsided casualty counts, and demonstrated that the mounted knight was really losing preeminence on the battlefield of late medieval Europe. We also, during this time period, see the rise of massed infantry in Switzerland and Scotland. However, instead of using the longbow, they will use pikes, very long spears. And this development of massed infantry will basically segue into modern European warfare when we think of, like Napoleon, or even the American Revolution, the American Civil War, masses of infantry fighting against each other using either spears or firearms. It's a nice little picture of someone wielding an English longbow to give you an idea of how difficult it would be to use the longbow. The draw tension was anywhere from about 150 to 180 pounds. In fact, using an English longbow is so taxing on a body that we can tell from archaeological evidence in England which men were professional archers, because usually this guy right here is left-handed, interestingly, but most people are right-handed. So their left forearm that actually held the bow out front would be calcified and would have kind of bone deposits from the repeated pressure of using this very powerful weapon. Joan of Arc is another important figure that emerges as an icon of French national identity. It's really under the leadership of Joan of Arc that the French actually start to defeat the English and rid their native soil of the damaging, destructive, barbaric, from the French perspective, English invaders. Joan of Arc is burnt at the stake in 1431 she's tried for heresy, essentially witchcraft, and this was a corrupt trial that was orchestrated by the English, but her death served as a rallying cry for the people of France and helped enable their eventual victory over the English. So, the 100 Years' War weakened the feudal system, but only brought about nascent national identity. It transitioned Europe to modern warfare and unified France while dividing England. All right. Thank you guys very much for watching this video, and I'll see you soon.